I thought hiring a tutor for my daughter would just mean better grades and fewer late nights, worrying over homework. When Daniel showed up at my door, polite, brilliant, and with a disarming smile, I felt relief. But week after week, as he patiently taught her algebra and history, I noticed he was teaching me something too. Something I had long forgotten about myself. One afternoon, while clearing away empty teacups and laughter still lingering in the air, he looked at me and said something that shook me to my core. Suddenly, lessons were no longer just for my daughter. I first met Daniel on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My daughter, Ellie, had been struggling with her classes for months, and I was desperate for help. When he walked through the door, carrying a warm leather satchel and wearing a navy blue sweater, I thought he looked barely older than Ellie herself. His warm, confident smile put me at ease. Immediately, "Mrs. Lawson, I am Daniel. Thank you for having me," he said, offering a firm handshake. There was something refreshing about his presence, something almost grounding. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a regular fixture in our home. Twice a week, he would come by after school, setting up at the kitchen table with Ellie, patiently guiding her through fractions and essays. I would sit nearby, pretending to read or clean. But secretly, I found myself listening to the cadence of his voice, calm, encouraging, never condescending. It had been years since someone's presence filled the house like that. After my divorce, life had settled into a steady, lonely rhythm. Work, home, chores. Repeat. Ellie had her teenage world and I had my responsibilities. I had grown used to the silence, the invisible wall that stood between my past and any possibility of a future. But Daniel was different. His laughter echoed through the halls. His kindness seeped into the walls and unintentionally into me. One evening, after a particularly stormy day, Daniel stayed a bit longer. The roads were flooded and Ellie had already gone to bed. I made a tea and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, steam rising between us. "You are doing a great job with her," he said, his eyes meeting mine. I smiled, brushing it off. "She is stubborn. Like her mother." His chuckle was soft, genuine. "That is not a bad thing. It just means she has spirit." The conversation drifted from Ellie's progress to lighter topics, books, travel, even embarrassing childhood stories. I found myself laughing in a way I had not in years, the kind of laughter that leaves your chest aching but your heart lighter. As the night wore on, I noticed things about him I had not allowed myself to see before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the thoughtful way he listened, the slight nervous habit he had of tapping his fingers against his cup. I was aware of a shift, subtle but undeniable. The following week, Daniel started arriving a little earlier, and sometimes stayed a little later. Ellie adored him, and I trusted him. But there was something unspoken building between us. Something that hung heavy in the air during those stolen moments when Ellie was out of earshot. One evening, as Daniel was packing up his books and notes, he hesitated. "Mrs. Lawson," he began, his voice unsure, "can I ask you something?" I looked up, heart thudding unexpectedly in my chest. "Of course." He took a slow breath, like he was choosing his words carefully. "Do you ever feel like you are living the life you were meant to live?" The question caught me so off guard that I just stared at him for a moment. It was not about algebra. It was not about Ellie. It was about me. About the quiet ache I carried every day but never dared to speak aloud. I swallowed hard, feeling something deep and buried stir inside me. Sometimes I said quietly, but mostly no. Daniel nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. There was a look in his eyes, not pity, not judgment, just understanding. It terrified me and thrilled me. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, his question echoing in my mind. For the first time in a long time, I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped dreaming. I had settled into survival. But Daniel, with one simple, unexpected question, had cracked something open inside me. And I knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next few tutoring sessions were a strange blend of normalcy and unspoken tension. Daniel and Ellie would sit at the table, scribbling notes and laughing over history trivia, but I could feel the undercurrent between us. Every time our eyes met across the room, there was a hesitation, a question lingering in the space between us. One Friday evening, Ellie asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house after tutoring. I agreed, thinking nothing of it. Daniel arrived as usual, unaware that tonight the house would feel different, quieter, more vulnerable. He was gathering his things after their lesson when he paused, glancing toward the door. Ellie said she is not here tonight. I shook my head. She went to a friend's. You do not have to rush off if you do not want to. It was a casual invitation, but it hung in the air heavy with implication. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then placed his bag back down on the chair. I could stay for a bit, he said, his voice low. I made tea again, a familiar ritual now. But everything felt charged, every glance, every movement. We talked about harmless things at first. The weather, plans for the weekend, favorite movies. But slowly, inevitably, the conversation circled back to that night, to that question. I have been thinking about what you asked me, I said, my fingers wrapped around the warm mug. About living the life I was meant to live. He leaned in slightly, the flicker of the lamp, catching the golden specks in his brown eyes. And I think I forgot how, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Daniel reached across the table, his fingers brushing lightly against mine. It was the smallest touch, tentative, questioning, but it sent a shiver down my spine. You deserve more, he said, his voice fierce with conviction. More than survival. More than loneliness. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of us, the space between us humming with possibility. Slowly, cautiously, he stood and moved around the table. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He knelt down in front of me, looking up into my eyes. You are beautiful, he said, as if it physically hurt him to hold the words back any longer. You are strong. And you deserve to feel alive again. I felt my throat tighten, emotions surging to the surface. No one had looked at me like that in years, like I was seen. Truly seen. Not as someone's mother, someone's ex-wife, someone's burden, but as myself. Daniel, I began, but he gently placed a finger over my lips. I know, he whispered. I know it is complicated. I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering the courage that had lain dormant for too long. When I opened them, he was still there, patient, steady, waiting. I reached out, threading my fingers through his hair, feeling the soft strands against my skin. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch with a soft sigh, like he had been holding his breath forever. When our lips finally met, it was not rushed or frantic. It was slow, tentative. An exploration rather than a conquest. His hands cradled my face as if I were something precious, something breakable. And in that moment, I realized I wanted to be broken open. I wanted to feel. He helped me stand, his arms wrapping around my waist, holding me close. We moved as if guided by an invisible rhythm, bodies aligning naturally. It was not about urgency. It was about discovery, about remembering that I was still capable of passion, of desire, of connection. He kissed a trail along my jawline, down my neck, every touch reverent. Every breath of silent worship. His hands traced the curves of my body, not with hunger, but with awe, like he was memorizing me. And I let him. I let myself feel every caress, every whispered word against my skin. I let myself sink into the warmth, into the rightness of it all. The years of loneliness, of second-guessing, melted away under his touch. When he finally lifted me into his arms and carried me toward the couch, there was a tenderness in his strength, a promise that he would not hurt me, that he would cherish whatever piece of me I was willing to give. We made love slowly, unhurriedly, learning each other's rhythms, each other's vulnerabilities. It was not about perfection. It was about honesty, about the healing that came from being touched with care, with intention. Afterward, we lay tangled together under a soft blanket, the dim light casting gentle shadows across the room. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling a profound sense of peace I had not known in years. He ran his fingers through my hair, his touch featherlight. You are incredible, he murmured. I smiled against his skin, feeling. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. Gratitude that life, unpredictable as it was, had given me this unexpected gift. Thank you, I whispered. He tightened his arms around me. No, he said softly. Thank you for trusting me. We stayed like that for a long time, no need for words. The silence between us was no longer heavy with loneliness, it was full of comfort, of hope. Eventually he kissed the top of my head and said, "This does not have to end here." I lifted my head to look at him. It does not. He smiled, a little shy, a little hopeful. No, if you are willing, I would like to see where this could go. My heart, once so guarded, fluttered with cautious hope. I had spent so long closing myself off, convinced that chapter of my life was over. But Daniel had shown me that there was still more to be written. That maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for me to find happiness again. I cupped his face in my hands, feeling the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his skin. I would like that, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant it with every fiber of my being. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the living room. I woke up still wrapped in Daniel's arms, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm against my back. For a few blissful moments, I let myself stay there, cocooned and warmth, pretending the world outside did not exist. But reality crept in quickly, the sound of a text notification, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the sharp reminder that this perfect, fragile moment could not last forever. I carefully disentangled myself and sat up, pulling the blanket around me. Daniel stirred, reaching out for me instinctively, his fingers brushing my arm. His touch sent a familiar shiver down my spine. You are not running away, are you? He murmured, still half asleep. I gave a small, sad smile. No. Just thinking. He sat up too, resting his chin on his hand as he studied me. About what? I hesitated. How could I explain the storm inside me? The fear of being judged, the fear of complicating everything, the fear of losing myself again in someone else's story instead of writing my own. I am scared, I admitted finally. Daniel's face softened. Of me? No, I said quickly, reaching out to touch his knee. Of what this means. Of what happens next. He nodded, understanding more in that moment than I could put into words. We do not have to figure it all out today, he said gently. One step at a time. One step at a time. It sounded so simple. But after years of carrying the weight of responsibility, of suppressing my own needs for the sake of others, it felt like stepping into a completely unfamiliar world. Later that day, after Daniel left, I sat by myself at the kitchen table staring at my reflection in the window. I looked the same tired eyes, same soft lines etched by time. But inside, everything had shifted. There was a knock at the door, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Ellie home early, her face flushed with excitement from her sleepover. Mom, she chirped, flinging her arms around me. Guess what? We are planning a big end of year party. Can we have it here? I laughed, ruffling her hair. We will see, sweetie. As she chattered on about her plans, I realized something. This was what I was fighting for. Not just a fleeting connection or a romantic fantasy, but a fuller life. One where I was more than just a caretaker, more than just a background character. A few days later, Daniel came by for another session. This time, things were different. We were different. There was a new layer to our interactions, a tenderness that went deeper than words. While Ellie worked on her assignments, Daniel and I stole glances across the room, small smiles exchanged in secret. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once, like balancing on the edge of something vast and unknown. After Ellie went upstairs to shower, Daniel lingered in the kitchen while I tidied up. There was a heavy silence between us, not uncomfortable, but charged with all the things left unsaid. Finally he spoke. I meant what I said. I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to. I looked at him, really looked at him, the earnestness in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. This was not a boy playing games. This was a man who saw me, who wanted me for who I was now, not who I used to be. I do not want you to go, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Relief flooded his features and he closed the distance between us, pulling me into a hug that said everything we were too scared to say aloud. I buried my face in his chest, breathing him in, feeling the steady thump of his heart against mine. It was messy. It was complicated. It was terrifying. But it was real. In the days that followed, we found a rhythm. Small, stolen moments, a brush of fingers. A shared smile, a lingering glance. It was not about rushing towards some grand declaration. It was about building something fragile and real, one moment at a time. And maybe that was the lesson he had truly come to teach me, that life did not have to be perfect, to be beautiful. That I was allowed to want more, to reach for happiness, even if it scared me. Especially if it scared me. Because sometimes the things that scare us the most are the ones that set us free. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet rhythm we had built became the new background music of my life. It was not a whirlwind romance, not a dramatic storybook affair. It was something far better. It was real, it was slow, and it was ours. Daniel continued tutoring Ellie, and somewhere between algebra lessons and late-night coffees, he became part of our family. I found myself laughing more, worrying less, and trusting the world and myself a little more each day. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel reached for my hand. His thumb traced small circles against my skin, grounding me, reassuring me. You changed my life, you know, he said softly. I smiled, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. You changed mine too. There were still moments when doubt crept in, whispering old fears. But then I would look at him, at us, and remember the lesson he had taught me without even meaning to. It was never too late to open your heart. It was never too late to choose joy. As the stars blinked to life overhead, Daniel kissed my temple and whispered, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed it. Maybe love did not always come crashing into your life with a roar. Maybe sometimes it arrived quietly, exactly when you needed it the most.